Louise Haigh joins us now for Labour's take on the ongoing strikes crisis across the public sector and transport network. I know you were tweeting about the Grant Shapps photo earlier this week as well.
It's the most Grant Shapps thing that's ever happened. You've taken the photo down. My favourite thing was that he actually forgot to Photoshop out Boris Johnson's elbow. That was still showing in the photo.
On to more serious matters, the rail strikes. What did you make of Mark Harper's interview? I don't know if you caught much of it.
Well, I think it's incredibly frustrating that here we are 6 months after the strikes have started. This dispute has been rumbling on for all these months and we're still hearing the same old rhetoric from the Transport Secretary. They started when Grant Shapps was still my opposite number, and even back then when they started it was clear to everyone in the industry and in the public that nothing could happen with this dispute, that the operators and Network Rail couldn't lift a finger without the Transport Secretary or the Treasury's influence, and these negotiations simply can't be brought to a resolution until the Transport Secretary does his job, grows up and sits down at the negotiating table with the operators. Because as you rightly pointed out, post-COVID, we now have this system where operators get a fixed fee regardless of whether their trains run. So they have absolutely no incentive whatsoever to settle this dispute.
So what exactly, because what Mark Harper is doing is talking to them, right?
Yeah.
Which is what Grant Shapps didn't do, but Mark Harper is actually now talking to the union bosses. So what would you do differently? You know, if you were the Transport Secretary, if you were sitting down around the table, what happens then?
Well, look, we've got a better tone from Mark Harper than Grant Shapps. There's no doubt about that. But there's worlds apart from getting in the unions for a cup of tea in the Department for Transport and actually sitting down and doing the hard graft of negotiation.
So what is your starting point from a negotiation then?
Well, the negotiation is about a whole raft of things. We've got pay, we've got conditions, we've got jobs, and that needs to be done actually as part of a wider conversation about reform in the rail industry. And that's part of the problem. That's part of the reason why the dispute is rumbling on longer than it should, because it's happening in this completely unreformed and, quite frankly, failing rail system where operators are being given a fee regardless of whether their trains run. And you've got a system where the likes of Avanti and TransPennine Express are not delivering the service that are required of them, not investing in the workforce as they have been asked to do time and time again over very many years. And it's a feature and a failure of the very short-term nature of the rail industry. So Labour have a plan to bring our railways back into public ownership, to reform the system, to put passengers back at the heart, and frankly reset industrial relations so we can bring this cycle of very disruptive disputes to an end.
You obviously do want reform with the nationalisation project, but my understanding is that would only happen when contracts expire, so we'll be some years away, even if Labour do get into power. So I'm kind of interested in the here and now. Do you think that rail fares are too expensive right now? Well,
rail fares have risen far faster than wages over the last 10 years. They've risen faster than fuel as well. So the rail is unaffordable for far too many people.
If it is unaffordable, then what would you do? Because at the minute, you know, the people working the railways want more money. They're resisting reforms that would, for example, lead to driver-operated trains, which would potentially reduce costs as well. And obviously there is this taxpayer subsidy as well that you've raised points about. So where does the savings come if you want to make rail fare more cheap?
Well, look, there needs to be investment in the rail service. It's undeniable, and the fact that there was investment through COVID to keep it going doesn't deny the fact that there are issues with pay now. You know, there needs to be that wider reform, and actually the vast majority of franchises will come up in the first for expiration in the first term of a Labour government. A lot are already being run by the operator of last resort, so it's not the case that this would be very far in the future. There needs to be that widespread reform, and the fact is the amount that they wanted to save through the workplace reforms that they're trying to push through have already been far eclipsed from the damage that these strikes have done to the economy over the last 6 months. So the intransigence and the ham-fisted approach that this government has taken to this dispute is costing the economy and the entire rail industry dear.
Just finally, should we care if the Prime Minister's had private healthcare?
I mean, we want the Prime Minister to be honest about it, which he failed to be at the weekend and only just corrected today. But I think what it gets to the heart of is because the NHS is in such crisis, because we have record waiting lists with over 7 million people waiting for healthcare, it has effectively created a two-tier health system, which means that a lot of people aren't able to access healthcare, aren't able to access a GP appointment and can't get into A&E. And it does mean that the well-off can afford private healthcare. And if that's the case for the Prime Minister, then he should be honest about it. And it does reveal something that he isn't necessarily experiencing, the very poor healthcare that a lot of people across the country are.
OK, thank you very much for being on the programme. Lou Haigh there.